Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Ott, and I am President and CEO of the Global Cold Chain Alliance. When Marianne approached me and said, "Hey, really like you to present at our conference." In fact, I think she approached me right when I started a couple of years ago. I said, whenever I can get down to Australia, I would love to take that opportunity. And really in these times when I guess you need to expect the unexpected, well, the unexpected came up, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to make the trip down there. But I'm very, very thankful for the opportunity that we have today to at least present to you via technology and virtually, and hopefully, this works just as well. I'll be providing my contact information at the end. If there's anything you want more information on, if you have any questions, if you want to connect, please take that opportunity. But to start, I thought I'd talk a little bit about myself. I know a lot of you haven't had the opportunity to connect with me virtually up to this point, and so I started as president and CEO of GCCA on June 1st in 2020. And you can only imagine how crazy it was to start as president and CEO of this organization right in the middle of the pandemic, right at a time where our industry was under a magnifying glass or a spotlight, or however you want to put it, like it never was before. We became extremely relevant. We became extremely important, and folks really wanted to know about our industry. And so it was a great time to come in and be able to spread the word about all of our members across the world. Fortunately, I had some experience in this industry. I actually spent about a decade at the National Grocers Association here in North America, servicing the retail side of the business, as well as full line wholesalers and consumer packaged good companies. And so our companies may have crossed paths and worked together, certainly worked together over the years. And it was good to be able to see a different side of the industry, be it 3PL or overall distribution from a different aspect. And so this has really been a fantastic opportunity as I've come into GCCA, and we've really been able to get a lot done. And so what I thought I'd do is start by just telling you a little bit about GCCA. I know some of you are new to GCCA. Some of you may have heard of us before. We've certainly been very active with RWTA over the years, but there's certainly been a lot of change over the course of the last 26 months since I came on board. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So GCCA, it has really existed to serve the 4 different partner organizations that make up GCCA. And so we have the International Association of Refrigerated Warehouses, the International Refrigerated Transportation Association, the Controlled Environment Building Association, and then the World Food Logistics Organization, which is really a 501c3 nonprofit, which means it's an education and research foundation. And we use it really for philanthropic efforts in addition to education and training. And so GCCA has a global footprint. Of course, we have companies in Australia. We've got over 1,500 member companies worldwide. We're in 92 countries. And this is interesting. And I think that this is something that's important to point out, because one of the things that I've heard as I've been out traveling across the globe or meeting with people virtually is that there's a misconception that GCCA really focuses on North America. And in actuality, over 49%, and might even be over 50% at this point, of our members are actually from outside North America. And for that reason, we have offices across the globe. Our main office, our HQ, is actually in Arlington, Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C., but we also have offices in South Africa, in Brazil, in Belgium, in India, and then also in Guatemala. So we want to make sure that we have an opportunity to serve our members from across the world, regardless of where they may be. And then, of course, we have opportunities to work with organizations like RWTA through partnerships, which I'll talk a little bit about here in a few moments. One of the really exciting things that has actually happened over the course of the last couple of years is that we've been having conversations between the IARW arm of GCCA and the IRTA side of GCCA about how we could be more collaborative and work together. And at our last board meetings, both boards voted unanimously to come together and actually truly create GCCA. So as of January 1st, 2023, we'll actually be coming truly GCCA. We'll be GCCA as a brand new organization, GCCA Warehouse and GCCA Transportation. And we really think that this uniquely positions us to serve the industry from a global perspective and talk about all the great things that our members are doing, whether it's on the warehouse side or the transportation side, to ensure that we're providing consumers across the globe with the highest quality, safest goods, pharmaceuticals, food, whatever it may be. So we're very excited about this new opportunity, and certainly more to come as we get closer to that date. I also want to talk about the World Food Logistics Organization. As I mentioned, this is our philanthropic foundation, and WFLO does a lot of really great work. But one of the things that I think is really, really important to point out is that WFLO is really actively involved in international development work. And what this means is we're really trying to either build up or establish the cold chain in places where it doesn't exist today. And so through WFLO, as you can see here, GCCA members are actively involved in helping out with these projects. And since 2002, over the course of the last 20 years, we've done over 111 projects. We actually have a handful more that are either in the pipeline or have started since this presentation was last made. We've helped the cold chain development in over 67 countries. And really, there's a lot of stuff that we do here. You know, the two primary areas that we have a lot of focus on are eliminating food waste, eliminating post-harvest loss. We do a lot of feasibility studies, and we work on infrastructure development in places, like I said, where cold chain doesn't necessarily exist or might not be as strong as we think it should be. We also do a lot of technical training, and we work either with government agencies, sometimes NGOs, sometimes international bodies of trade, to try to put together either the technical training, the assessments and research, to try to bring the cold chain to places where it's not at today. And you can see here on this next slide, we really have done projects across the world. Haven't gotten one in Australia yet, but soon enough. So a lot of great opportunity here. The one thing that I will mention is, this is a fantastic opportunity for our members across the globe to get involved. Really, most of these projects are really being conducted through the philanthropic efforts of our members. And so that's providing technical expertise that could actually be going to one of the locations. We just had a member actually travel to Ghana to help out with a project that we have going on there, as well as projects in Southeast Asia and other parts across the globe. So that's an opportunity, but you don't have to travel to get engaged. If you want to provide expertise and help us in developing the cold chain, as I said, my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. Please reach out to me and I'll connect you with our international development team. We do a lot of great work. This is actually one of my favorite things that we do, and it's really, really exciting stuff. I also want to talk about the Controlled Environment Building Association. So CEBA, as we know it, has really been, I'd say a North American organization. And its board of directors has really started to focus in on how we can become a more international organization, given the fact that GCCA does have the size and scope that it has across the world. And so you'll be seeing new initiatives from CEBA in terms of projects and opportunities and training that's going to be relevant to folks across the world. So if you're in the audience and you happen to be a design build firm, if you happen to work in construction, if you happen to be a service supplier to the cold storage or cold transportation industry, you definitely let us know. Be on the lookout for more CEBA information. There's going to be a lot of really relevant content that's going to be coming out of CEBA here over the course of the next couple of months. Overall, I want to talk about GCCA and our global strategies and certainly some of our key priorities, because there's been a lot going on, as I mentioned, and we've certainly had some shifts in terms of what we've been working on collectively as an organization. I'd say the number one thing that I've heard across the world, didn't matter where I was at, is that GCCA really needed to take an enhanced position in advocacy activities. We really have a tremendous opportunity now to talk about who we are, what we do, why we're important. And we really have an opportunity across the world to influence policy and regulations and ensure that those that are making those policies and regulations understand who we are and know that we're a trusted advisor and that we can be of help when they have questions. So that's one of the things that we've really rolled out and started to roll out. I'll get into advocacy here shortly, but that's been a priority over the course of the last 2 years. It'll continue to be a priority coming up here into 22 and 23. We're also evaluating and trying to launch new data and training opportunities across the world. You may recall that we've done a WFLO Institute in Australia. We are unfortunately, just as a result of the pandemic, weren't able to do it in 2022. However, we're going to continue to work with Marianne and the team and try to figure out how we can bring it back in 2023. So more to come there. As I mentioned, we have returned to in-person international project work. We've had boots on the ground on a couple of projects already. As I mentioned, great opportunity for GCCA and RWTA members to get involved and actively be a part of the development of the cold chain globally. And I think this is probably, really something that has really changed, is we really want to make sure that we're putting the G in GCCA. It talks about events here because we want to make sure that we're putting out relevant content, whether it's virtual or in person across the world. But, you're going to see more and more content that's specific to the region or country in which you're at, so that you can learn not only what's going on from a global perspective, but also what's going on where you're at in the world. And of course, we do that through our partnership with RWTA. And RWTA, and we're very thankful to Marianne and the team. They are just great partners. As I mentioned, I think Marianne was one of the first people to call me when I got the job, and it's really been great working with her and being collaborative teammates, if you will, on this endeavor that has certainly been challenging for everybody, but I think very rewarding as well. But there's certainly a list of other partnership organizations that we work with across the globe. I know you have the opportunity to potentially hear, I believe Cold Chain Federation is speaking virtually this week as well, but more to come. And really, you're going to see more and more of these opportunities from us, because I truly believe that there's strength in numbers, and I truly want to make sure that we're able to work with all of these different organizations and try to ensure that our messaging is the same, and try to make sure that we're servicing our members across the world and we're not duplicating efforts. If there's something that RWTA is doing well, we'd like to provide that to GCCA members, and vice versa. And it's a good time to mention that RWTA members on the warehouse and transportation side of things do get GCCA member benefits. So if you need more information there, once again, contact me, and I'd love to get you in touch with our team to get you on board with that. Lastly, before I go into some industry trends, one of our roles we feel is trying to keep the cold chain connected globally. And so throughout the pandemic, we've done a lot of that virtually. We had a great program, our virtual innovation program, at the end of 2020. We actually just wrapped up our virtual policy forum, which gave a really unique perspective on advocacy efforts across the globe. But we've actually been trying to get out there wherever we can to connect people. And so, as I mentioned, wasn't able to get to Australia this time, unfortunately, but certainly a high priority for me and the rest of the team. So more to come there. These are just some pictures from some of the events that we've had across the globe, and ways that we're trying to keep everybody connected. And with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of the industry. And I don't think I have to tell anybody, as I said, it's been interesting times. And certainly our industry has changed pretty significantly, just in terms of the players that are operating within our industry, but also I think just in terms of how we're looking at the future. And so to start, I'm going to show you a slide that actually shows you the global top 25 warehouse members when I started on June 1st, 2020. And funny story about that, I signed my contract to come and work for GCCA. I think it was May 14th or May 15th. And a couple of days later, I got a call that our one of our largest members was acquired, and I kind of shook it off at the time, saying, okay, well, no big deal. And then inevitably, what ended up happening was we started to see a massive sea change in terms of the investment in the industry. Private equity investment and the activity from private equity firms continually increased, and it increased rapidly. This is just a sampling of some of the companies that have either contacted GCCA to get more information on GCCA or to learn about the industry. We know that all of these companies are currently active. We know there's other companies from the private equity space that aren't even on here yet that are trying to get active. And part of it is because cold chain is so hot. As I mentioned, we're extremely relevant right now. We're in the news. Folks see opportunities to invest. And so what that's meant is that there's been continued consolidation. And so from the last slide to this slide, the companies that are highlighted in yellow here have been acquired by somebody else. They're no longer on our top 25 list. And what we've got now is an updated top 25 list. Let's go back there. So, certainly there's some big players there that I know that are operating in Australia that are big global players as well. But one of the most interesting things, and I think this has been a change from 2020 to 2022, if you go before 2020, most of the acquisitions and a lot of the activity, was really North American. And we've started to see that change pretty significantly. A lot of the players that we're seeing on our list and a lot of the players that we see rising up the list are actually on the international side. As I mentioned, over 49% of GCCA members are international. And so as you start to look at it just from capacity increase, from a cubic meter perspective, of course, there's some large players at the top there, but really very interestingly, as you start to go down that list, as I said, there's more of an international flavor. There's actually companies from across the world. And I think we're going to continue to see that. We've certainly seen that, I think, over the course of the last couple of months. But the other interesting thing is really just what you see from a capacity percentage, because actually on this list, you might think that a company that was at the top might have been at the top, but there's a lot of other players out there right now that are working across the globe to increase capacity and ensure that they're operating as efficiently as possible. So I think we're going to see more here. The only thing I would say is that it's certainly slowed significantly from what I initially saw in 2020, and I don't think that we're going to see what we saw then anytime soon, especially as capital has started to dry up a little bit. But definitely interesting just once again to see what we've got from an international perspective. want to talk a little bit about consumer trends impacting the cold chain. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. As I mentioned, I came from, this side of the business. I worked with retail grocers and wholesale grocers and CPG companies. And so I have a somewhat unique perspective in terms of just some of the things, that I was expecting, just from a traditional retail perspective. Actually, when I left NGA, I actually started a company that was working with technology providers and retail grocers to implement technology to make home delivery more accessible or click and collect more accessible. And I had no idea it was going to be as relevant as it was 2 months later, but certainly was very, very interesting to be able to experience that on the front lines before I joined GCCA. But all of this stuff really impacts GCCA members across the globe. And so as you start to look at consumer trends, it really starts to show you in terms of what you're going to be looking at in terms of what's going into your warehouse, what's coming in, what's going out, product assortment in terms of where it's going. But if you look at overall U.S. food spend, and this is really one of the more impressive numbers out there, 2020 was $1.7 trillion, and at home food was up to 878 billion with a B, which is a significant increase. From a U.S. perspective, historically, we've seen the restaurant and food service numbers much higher than the at-home. And when you see at-home, that really means grocery stores, retail. You can see here, 57% increase from March 19 to March 20 in terms of at-home food expenditures. And once again, that's continuing in 2020. We've seen the restaurant numbers start to dip, come up and then dip a little bit again. But the at-home numbers are still extremely, extremely strong. This is extremely important to our industry, and we see this number consistently across the globe. But we saw just recently a study come out that 74% of U.S. consumers intended on purchasing frozen foods, so they remain hot, and that's really a 10% pre-pandemic. So that's certainly good for our industry. Like I said, that's something that we're certainly seeing across the globe as well. This one's a little bit different perspective. This is really online grocery sales. And the interesting thing here, and you can see the way that this chart works out, is you can see significant growth in that blue column on the left, which is either delivery or pickup. Okay, the gray there is shipped to home. The overall numbers there are staggering. They're in billions. So, right now, as you look at December 2021, 8.9 billion in either ship to home, delivery, or pickup from a U.S. grocery perspective. You can see how much that's continually increased throughout the pandemic. And really, if you look at that number all the way at the left, at 2, that's from August of 19. So significant jump, as a result of the pandemic. U.S. online grocery sales, continue to grow. And that's something that we see globally. And in fact, the U.S. is actually probably a little bit behind Europe and some other markets out there. But this is, probably the best data that's out there in terms of measurement, just in terms of technology that's in place here in the U.S. But certainly a trend that continues to change. And I think it's important in this industry because, once again, in terms of your product portfolio, in terms of your ability to pick cases, et cetera, that certainly might change as we see this demographic shift. This is a global slide. So, if you look at just channels that shop for groceries, 45% are shopping more online for groceries than pre-pandemic. And we're starting to see a shift into the online delivery space. This is actually really different for grocery specifically. And I think, for those of you that deal in fresh, just because a lot of folks that were purchasing fresh goods really wanted to go in there and be able to see what they were buying. They wanted to, be able to squeeze the avocado or look at the piece of meat. And, that is really changing. People are really trying to, get out of they like the comfy confines of their home. They like the convenience of being able to click, either go collect it or have it show up at their door. Down here, you can see just in terms of the preferred method of ordering groceries, certainly no no surprises here. Overall, it's widely driven by desktop orders. However, if you look at the left there, Gen Z millennials, 40% is being done on mobile phones. And that number continually increases, especially as the technology improves and we see a lot of easier to order products. Another interesting global slide here is just the consumer trends in terms of driving the engagement. Global customers are actually online hunting for the best deals. And so really what this means is they'll go to 10 different stores if it means they can get the best deal on 10 different things, which is another thing that really never happened in grocery ever. It was really out of convenience. You'd go to one store or you'd go to a store that you had a relationship with or that had the best meat or had the best produce, et cetera. You were really focused in on brand loyalty, especially here in the US. But if you look at this here, and specifically, those areas focused or highlighted in green there, those are all in Asia. And that's where we've seen significant shift in terms of preference for online shopping. And you can see there, shoppers who purchased food and groceries online in 2021, globally, it was up 9% from 2019. But in Asia Pac, in your region, it was up 11%. And you've got Australia there. You can see Australia itself was up 14%. And this is data that actually came from Nielsen IQ data. So this is data that actually was coming from the transaction logs. The other trend, of course, impact of inflation. I don't have to tell you, it, you're living it. We're living it here as well. But one of the interesting things here is just the food inflation. And here in the U.S., our food inflation is actually much higher than our overall inflation. And it was interesting as I was going through and looking at other countries, and I've done similar presentations in other parts of the world. And very rarely am I seeing food inflation lag behind overall inflation. And so that is rare, and that's interesting. And I think that something that you should all be watching because it's certainly, as you look at this next slide, starts to impact how customers are consuming their food, how they're actually going to purchase it. In the US alone, just the at-home food costs, or the retail costs that we discussed before, are almost up 12%. 35% of customers that deal with this increase in costs are actually switching to private labels. So they may have been very brand loyal before, they're not anymore. And so that might impact your customers. Something to certainly watch. 21% are buying less meat and seafood. So that's another thing that certainly impacts our industry. And we're certainly watching in the US. I'm also seeing these trends across Europe as well right now. That being said, the average weekly grocery spend is actually up just as a result of this food inflation here in the US, 4%. So if you got food inflation of 10% and you're only up 4% of your grocery bill, something's got to give. So folks are actually buying less food overall. So definitely something that you definitely have to take a look at, and certainly, work with your customers on as you're trying to, go through and project, what your cases are looking like. So in terms of the future and opportunities, you definitely need to continue to monitor the impact of inflation. I think we're seeing that soften a little bit. Certainly saw it here in the US. One of the other things to look at is remote work. Is it here to stay? We're starting to see some shifts. The technology companies were really, I think, at the front runners in terms of sending everybody home, and now they're starting to ask folks to come back. And so, that may change, but the convenience of being at home and working at home and having your groceries delivered at home, certainly drove, I think, a lot of the trends that you saw earlier. I'm going to talk about this, the distribution and supply chain challenges here shortly. Once again, you work here, you know the issues, but it's really disrupting the industry norms and consumer choice. And what I mean by that is ultimately, you may have had, and certainly here in the US, we're spoiled with choice. You may have had the opportunity to pick from, 12 different types of ketchup and or sizes and or whatever. And well, you may have to go in there and just get the one that they have. And that's really changing basket size. It's also changing, the availability of products and what we're seeing get purchased. As I mentioned, limited brand loyalty also goes in line with that last point. But it also, like I said, may impact your customers. Definitely paradigm shifts in terms of distribution channels and methods of delivery. This picture here is, essentially what we'd call here, it's a company in the UK called Wheezy. And really, these are actually drivers that go into this, what we call a dark warehouse. They pick their own groceries and then they deliver them to this urban area here in the UK. We're starting to see these pop up across the world. Certainly is going to impact our industry just in terms of the case assortment, what's going in, what's going out, sizes, et cetera, if this continues to be a trend that stays hot. And then, of course, there's the impact of new entrants to the industry as well. And by new entrants, I mean companies like this, as well as things that we haven't even considered yet, just from a retail perspective. So supply chain disruption, the headache that we're all dealing with. And this is one where, Marianne asked me to kind of give you a perspective and then give you some some opportunities, or maybe, sugarcoat it a little bit. And this one, I don't have a whole lot of good news. So I apologize in advance for that one. The one piece of good news that I do have, at least giving you the U.S. perspective in terms of supply chain disruption, we're actually starting to see some signs of improvement on the West Coast, which is really going to impact, Asia Pac, Australia. I'm sure you heard that, at one point there was a 109 ship queue to enter the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach. For someone like myself who was renovating a house, that meant that buying a refrigerator took 16 months instead of 16 days. But for a lot of our members, it also meant that a lot of the product just wasn't getting in time, and we saw a lot of issues with that as well. But they've really been able to pick it up at the Port of Los Angeles. Their commissioner just announced that they were able to move 12% more imports last month than they would normally do on average. That's fantastic. The bad news is, while we're seeing improvements on the West Coast, now we're starting to see a backlog on the East Coast. And I'll talk a little bit about why. There's definitely a lot of international factors at play on that one, but definitely something to watch. If we start seeing a backlog again on the East Coast, whether or not those containers are going to have to go around North America and start going into the West Coast, which might impact, the Asia Pac and Australia. This is another little troubling stat here. Over 33,700 empty containers were just announced sitting empty at the port by the LA commissioner in his update recently. On average at LA, you really only have like 9,000. So you're looking at almost 4 times the amount of empty containers that are sitting there on the port. Just like in other parts of the world, the primary issue here is going to be labor. It's labor at the port. All of our ports on the West Coast, by and large, are unionized, which certainly impacts folks' ability and or how long they're able to work and how many people are able to work based on their labor agreements. But we also have significant transportation issues, much like you're seeing in other parts of the world. The rail yards specifically are causing a pretty significant backup. And you may or may not have seen, this is actually impacting even home delivery. We're seeing really significant issues as these cargo containers are actually getting unloaded. You actually have organized stuff coming in and taking the product. So that's just another issue that we've got here in the U.S. East Coast ports, as I said, averaging 57 ship queue right now. That's continuing to increase, and that's also troubling just because of the cost here in the U.S. Overall, and this is another stat that we've just got to look at, global trade volumes last month decreased 2.5% in May year over year. And so as we start to see demand soften, we certainly might see, I would say, containers move a little quicker. We certainly might see some of the congestion ease up, but we've got other issues. We've got terminal congestion actually in other parts of the world now. There's strikes in Europe and other parts of the world. In China, in other parts of Asia, we're seeing power shortages. I think right now they're currently shut down, or they're about to put back on the power just due to the extreme heat in Asia. And all of this is causing backlogs globally. And of course, you got the conflict in Ukraine, which is certainly going to impact commodities as well in terms of what's going in, what's going out, and what sort of ships and cargo are going to be able to move through that area. Container fees, have actually softened pretty significantly globally. The one exception is here in the U.S. As I mentioned, we have extremely high D&D costs. In fact, we have the highest in the world. And a lot of our members, we do a lot of work with our members just to try to help them in terms of moving product here in the U.S., but also globally. So I will offer that up to any of you if you're ever in a situation where you're having a hard time, getting containers in, getting containers out, moving product. Certainly reach out to us and our advocacy team, and we do anything we possibly can to be able to help you. The other thing that has been a challenge continually throughout the course of the last 18 months is just the import-export imbalances. And so that may be the shipping of empty containers. This is really a significant issue between the US and China. We're certainly seeing a lot more empty containers go out than we're seeing full containers go out. And a lot of it just has to do with the pricing in terms of the value of an empty container versus the value of a full container. Experts are unfortunately, thinking this is going to happen and continue to happen, given all the challenges that we have, at least through mid 2023, but potentially longer. So, as I said, I wish I had a better story to tell on that one, but that's where we're at. I think more than anything else, it's buckle up and try to hope for the best from this perspective. And now we're going to talk a little bit about labor. So if I were to go out and I would just to ask our members across the world, what's the number one challenge you have? And I'm sure if I asked you and I was there and we could actually do a call and response, I'm sure most of you would probably say labor, because it is a global problem. And I'll talk a little bit about why, but specifically in Australia, you guys have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the world, which is very, very impressive. Global unemployment rate right now is at 5.3%, which is historic. If you were to look at those without jobs just between 2019 and 2020, you see that it went from 186 million to 207 million worldwide. And the primary reason for that is going to be COVID measures. So there's still a lot of folks across the world who either haven't come back to the workplace as a result of previous COVID measures, or are currently in a situation where they're not able to go back to work or haven't gone back to work because of currently implemented COVID measures. We've certainly seen a lot of that in China and other parts of Asia, even as recently as the last couple of months. This stat is a little scary. The International Labor Organization projects a global deficit. If you were just look at hours worked, okay, it's basically equivalent to 52 million full-time jobs that we have a global deficit of right now, if you were to look across the globe. That's huge. And that certainly impacts our industry. If you were to look at just how our industry trends, at least here in the US, but in other parts of the world as well, we generally see that our industry has a little bit of a higher unemployment rate, just as a result of the fact that we either require skilled labor, we have somewhat tough working conditions in some respects, and it's been a challenge, I would say, especially here in the US, especially as we've seen some COVID policies, especially early on in the pandemic, incentivize people to stay home. Fortunately, that's starting to ease here in North America. I know it has in other parts of the world as well. So hopefully we start to see that imbalance even out a little bit. As I mentioned, it's a problem. The labor market deficit is going to continue in 2023 for sure. The question is, how bad is it going to get as we start to see the COVID measures roll back? And that is the $1 million question, because there's a lot of factors here at play. From a pandemic perspective, if you look at the global, the top 20 global economies, markets have been doing well, real estate's been doing well. There's a lot of folks that exited the job market. They cashed out. They were in a situation where they could retire early. There's a shortage of skilled labor out there across the world. There's actually birth rates are lower almost across the world. There's a lot of factors out there that are really impacting this. But right now, the global participation rate of eligible workers from 2019 to 2022 has actually been down 1.2%. So when you start to think about the amount of people in this world, that's a pretty significant number. In looking at Australia, and I think this number actually just fell below 4%, and it might, if it hasn't, it might by the time you see this presentation. First time that's happened since 1974, and so this is a historic number. One of the things to really look at here, the population of the Australians working age folks has actually stalled since the pandemic to just below 21 million folks. So it was actually kind of on an upward trend, and you started to see it continue to grow. It's actually starting to flatten out, and it's actually starting to decrease a little bit. And this is something that we've seen across the world, but especially in the US, and I'll get to that in a second. 21% of Australia's working age population is currently 65 or older versus 12%. That's huge. And that's just another, as we look to the future, as you start to see these folks exit the workplace, are we going to be able to bring in more folks at the pace that they're exiting? It's hard to say, but right now, I think all indications are leading to no. This number is also an important number, and it's actually increased in Australia, but not nearly what it is in other places in the world. 17% of Australia's workers are actively seeking a new job. And that's actually up from, I believe, in the 9-10% range just since the pandemic started. You'll see some numbers from the US. They're quite different. And the other thing is there's just been an uptick in the proportion of workers in Australia that are switching jobs. Overall, the Australian job market, if you were to look at, just some of the trends that you see from the economic modeling and from some of the researchers out there that focus in on these demographics, actually the proportion of workers switching jobs is relatively low from a global perspective. So you're lucky there so long as you don't start to see the trends that we've seen in the US. And so in the US, we have seen a shrinking and aging workforce. And we've actually started to see this in Canada as well. But working age population is decreasing at historic levels. And so if you were to look at this chart, everything that is in purple, every single state that is in purple has seen a decrease in terms of the US population of anybody who's age 16 and up from 2010 to 2019. We haven't gone through and calculated our census data to get this number yet, but I can tell you the next time we do our census and we get this number, it's going to be even lower. The fact that there was only one state that saw an increase was really just as a result of just a shift in terms of workplace dynamics, and the fact that Utah is a pretty friendly place to live, and the fact that people move from other places like California, New York, et cetera, where it was a higher cost place to live, and they've been working remotely in places like Utah, and actually right above Utah, Idaho, and even places like Texas. So definitely something to look at there. The national unemployment rate here is at historically low levels. I mean, 3.6%, much like Australia. We are, one of the, it's one of the lowest rates in the world right now. And as I stated previously, the global labor force decreased 1.2% since 2019. We continue to see those numbers increase just in the US alone. Here's another really challenging part, something, and it might be a cautionary tale. As my good friend Marianne says, when the US sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. But we hope that's not the case on this one. The quit rates in the US are at historic levels. Overall, across all industries, they're at 2.9% over the course of this period in time. And you can see the way this graph is laid out. The two lines there, the dotted line is overall, the red line is our industry. So trade, transportation, utilities is higher, 3.7%. So I had mentioned in Australia, pretty low number in terms of those people that actually can work looking for a new job. In the US, it seems like everybody's free agents. So almost half the people out here in the US are looking for a new job. And this is actually very consistent. It actually might be a little low with some of the numbers we're seeing out of Europe and Latin America. Folks are certainly taking into account work-life balance and some other things, and certainly thinking about the 2 years they had during the pandemic when their life may have been different, and they're reconsidering when and where they want to work. And these are the primary reasons for leaving. 18% are career-related, 10.5% work-life balance, 10% just say they're dissatisfied, they don't want to be there, and 7.8% they just don't like the person they're working for. And this is the other part that's somewhat of a challenge for our industry, but I think some of our members have done a pretty good job of trying to manage this the best they possibly can here in the US. But folks just expect more flexibility in terms of their hours. So whether that's modifying shifts so that you can be more flexible and have people work at different times of day, compressing schedules, doing what you can based on the amount of people that you have. At least here in the US, that's just become an expectation, and certainly a challenge for the industry. And I know that you're seeing it in Australia, and we're certainly seeing it in other parts of the world as well. So what are our opportunities here? I actually think we have a tremendous amount of opportunity, and we really want to make sure we're continuing to recruit talent, train talent, retain talent. So the number one thing that we have in our favor is the why and why we do it. We have a great story. We feed the world. As I said before, we provide access to the highest quality, safest goods, whether it be food, pharmaceuticals. We may have bent, but we never broke throughout the pandemic. We've got a great story to tell. And you see some examples here just of other companies from across the world showcasing their staff, right? But I think it's also important to showcase what your mission is, what your values are, what you as a company stand for, because there's a lot of folks out there that'll latch on and join your cause if you're going to be persuasive enough. Certainly promote opportunities within the industry. It's kind of a seeing eye chart, but I can certainly provide this deck or this slide to you. But these are all folks that have been acknowledged for something that they have done well, or it's being acknowledged for being promoted. There's a lot of opportunities in this industry just as a result of the fact that we do have so many open positions. And so if you come in and you work hard, showcase the fact that there is an opportunity to put your career path on a higher level and accelerate that career path. Certainly promote diversity and inclusion. If you were to look at data from across the world, this is something that's extremely important to Gen Y, is ensuring that their values are in line with your values, specifically around DE&I. So definitely pay attention to that. Actually the post that's up there on the top right is actually from Americold in their Asia Pacific region, and they had essentially a heritage day, showcase your heritage. And those are the sorts of things that are really, really important to the younger generation coming into the workforce. Provide incentives in that bottom left. It's actually from the ICECO in the UK. Just showcasing folks that are either doing a great job, promoting the values of the company, et cetera. That sort of stuff goes a mile. I mean, people really, really love that. And certainly when you post it on social media. So showcase that satisfaction, pride. The number one thing I'll say here, all 4 of these posts for social media, use it. It's free advertising, and one of these is Cold Chain Champion. We try to get members from across the world and showcase them, talk about their stories, and try to make sure that we're doing our best job of showcasing all the great talent, all the great people that we have working in the industry. So if you have someone that you want to put forward for Cold Chain Champions, certainly let us know. We'd love to highlight them. Lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about advocacy, because it's really, really important. And it puts a bow on all the stuff we just talked about. And certainly, GCCA, and I know RWTA as well, is very, very active in advocacy. So we are actually, as I mentioned earlier, really working on improving our advocacy efforts across the globe. Through our partnership with RWTA, we want to continue to strengthen those efforts in Australia, but we also want to use the stories that we're seeing from other regions in the world, other countries, other continents, just to talk about challenges that we've seen, challenges that we've overcome, cautionary tales, et cetera. Those are the sorts of things that elected officials and regulatory bodies and agencies across the world, they want to hear that stuff. And we've really doubled down on advocacy here in the U.S. We now are focused on regulatory and legislative. You can see here that we've added new resources in these other regions as well. And we're going to continue to work to be a voice and work with all of our partners like RWTA across the world. Whenever we have an issue, we want to have these partners that we can reach out to and shake hands and work together to ensure that we're truly representing the best interest for the global cold chain across the world. I'll talk a little bit about our global advocacy priorities. As I mentioned, labor, number one. It doesn't matter where we go, every single region, everybody's really, really focused on labor. How do we recruit? How do we train? How do we retain? How do we keep labor safe? How are we ensuring that there's policies in place, that aren't overly burdensome on companies and staff? Food safety is the hallmark of what we do. It's why our customers hire us. Well, we want to ensure that the policymakers understand that, and that we are experts, and that we should have a seat at the table when ever discussing regulations across the world related to food policy. Refrigerant policy and energy, I think that's certainly an area that we're seeing more interest in the US and North America. A lot of interest, of course, in Europe, and Europe is light speeds ahead of us, but certainly seeing other parts of the world. So, working on ensuring that, we've got as much information out there just about the cans and cannot, and what's reasonable, and certainly what we can do here in the US. The Biden administration has really, really taken a strong stance on environmental standards, and we've been working with them to ensure that they understand what we can do as an industry. And lastly, occupational safety, which once again, really goes back to labor. It's working with regulatory agencies just to keep our folks safe across the world. I'd highly encourage you to visit advocacy.gcca.org. We've got great resources for across the world. We're working on developing additional Australian content. We'll continue to work with RWTA to get stuff out there, but it really gives you a global perspective. We've got a weekly newsletter that goes out, which touches on everything that's going on across the world. You can sign up for that for absolutely free. And then lastly, GCCA events. So we actually, as I mentioned, we just wrapped up our global policy forum. RWTA members have access to that through the on-demand portal. So if you have any need to get in there, and I highly encourage you, there's a lot of really great sessions in there from across the world. Let us know if you need help. The IARW WFLO convention, the last one, because moving forward will be the GCCA convention, will be occurring in San Diego this October. And if you're not aware of what this is really our annual meeting. This is when we come together and we share thoughts from across all the different communities of GCCA, just to ensure that we're staying ahead of any sort of challenges we have, but also talk about best practices. And, we were able to have our convention last year. It was record numbers. We're anticipating record numbers again this year. So highly encourage you to make it if you can. It's on the West Coast, so it's at least a little closer for our Australian friends. And then lastly, CEBA conference, which will be in Florida, really focused on construction design build side of things. And so not just for the folks that are doing it, but if you're interested in getting more information on best practices in terms of facility maintenance, facility build, design, et cetera, this is a great conference for you. And with that, I know that I'm up on time. I could talk forever about all this stuff. I love it so much. Certainly wish I was there to grab a beverage with you and meet with you at the dinner tonight, but we'll have to do it virtually. If you haven't connected with me on LinkedIn, my LinkedIn's here. Highly encourage you to do so. I try to post as much as possible. My Twitter's here as well as my email. The one thing I'll say about both myself and the rest of the GCCA staff is we want to be here to be a resource. So regardless of whether you're a member or not, regardless of whether you've been engaged or not, if there's anything that we can help you with, if there's anything you think we should be partnering with Marianne and the rest of the RWTA team, please do not hesitate to reach out. We want to be a resource for you. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. And I hope I get to connect with you soon. And until then, I hope you all take care, be well, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.